was another graveyard shift. Another night of my life spent behind a cheap wooden counter. I was basically pissing my life away, but I was doing it for some money, so it was all good. And I was better off than most of the people who walked through those doors anyway. It was 2:30 a.m. or so. I remember staring at the clock in boredom, watching the two dots of the display tick on and off as it counted the seconds. That was when I heard the bell over the door, and I looked up to gauge the person who had just stepped into my little world. He was only a little over 5 feet tall, and looked like he could be 50 years old, easily. His skin was rough and saggy. His arms and legs were dotted all over with tiny white hairs, matched by equally white hair which hung down in long reams from his head. It was scraggly and matted together. You know how hair gets if you don't take a shower for like 2 days. This guy looked like he'd spent 2 weeks without the good graces of any shampoo. He slowly walked his way over to the counter, mechanically, like each step was a deliberate action. Finally, he made it over to me, and he thumped his hand onto the counter for support. His hands were crisscrossed with varicose veins. They looked like cracks in broken glass. Lines of black grit ran underneath the edges of his fingernails. He finally opened his mouth to speak, and gave me a good view of his slimy yellow teeth. Absolutely disgusting. He asked in a croaky voice where our bathroom was, and I just pointed sternly toward the back corner of the room. There was a little hallway, which held doors to the storage room and one small bathroom. He lumbered off in that general direction, and I silently thanked God that weirdo was out of my face. I heard the door click shut. Once again I was by myself, for the most part. The station was silent for 5 minutes, then 10, 15. It started to get weird, how long this guy was taking in the bathroom. If it were a normal looking guy, I wouldn't have questioned it, but this man in there was anything but normal. At the 20-minute mark, I journeyed out from behind my counter and towards the bedroom. I knocked on the door a couple of times and asked if the guy needed any help. I heard him mumble from the other side that he was fine, but he didn't sound all that fine to me. I wasn't going to argue with him though, so I just walked back over to the counter and sat down on my chair. Another 10 minutes went by, and that guy still hadn't come out. I was getting agitated at that point. Eventually, I started hearing a noise. At first, I couldn't really tell what it was, but it didn't take long to figure it out. I was hearing moaning. I started walking back to the bathroom once again. This time, I could tell as I neared the door that something definitely wasn't right. It sounded like the man was in pain, maybe even afraid. Sheepishly, I knocked on the door once again, and for a while I didn't get a response. But eventually, the man managed to choke out 2 simple words: "Help me." His moaning was getting louder and turning to yelling. I started hearing banging from inside the bathroom. I could even feel it shake the floor just a little. I went for the knob, but of course, the men had locked themselves into the bathroom and hadn't gotten around to actually trying to unlock it. At this point, I was panicking a little. I didn't know if this was just a bad case of the runs or something like that, or if it was something more serious. I started to think that the latter was true, but there was a rancid stench that was beginning to make its way out of that damn bathroom. It could have been just some horrible diarrhea, I thought. I shuddered a little bit at that. I shouted at him to open the door. He had to unlock it if he wanted help, of course, but he wasn't listening to me. He started babbling some incoherent nonsense about how he had to keep the door locked because he was only safe in that room. They were coming for him, he said. I kept shouting at him to unlock the door, but he was off on a horrible tangent about how they were coming for him, and how they had finally figured him out. All the while, his slurred speech was punctuated by cries for help. He just kept shouting for help. I kept hearing banging. I was freaked out, and in that moment I didn't figure I had time to call the cops or anything like that. The man's speech was trailing off, and he sounded like he was in a very bad way. I'd like to say that I didn't freak out, that I knew what to do, and handled the situation in a respectable way. But I did none of that. I spent the next probably 5 minutes pacing in that little hallway, my hands pressed to my head in desperation while I tried to think of something, anything to do. The man's yelling and flailing had stopped, I noticed, and I was desperate to do something. Finally, I was struck with inspiration. I went into the storage room next to me, and I grabbed a rolling dolly that we used to move some of the heavier crates around. Then, I rushed back into the hallway, and with all the force I could muster, which must have been a lot thanks to the adrenaline, I bashed the door wide open. The smell that hit me almost made me throw up right then and there. I dropped the rolling dolly and almost stumbled away from the room, gagging. I almost fell over, but I steadied myself on a wine shelf. I had to take a moment to catch myself, and it felt like I was going insane. It really struck me then that I needed outside help, so I did what any sensible person would have done a while back. I called the police. I assumed the worst. And the moment I saw the man, it looked like he was certainly dead. He was sprawled out on the tile floor, half-heartedly resting against the wall. His back was slumped down, curving in the space between the wall and the floor. His knuckles were very bloody, and pockmarks in the wall, which were almost licked with blood, made it fairly obvious he had been punching around. It was obvious enough where the smell was coming from. That bastard was sitting in a putrid film of brown liquid. Yes, he shit himself. He wasn't even on the toilet for Christ's sake. Freaking hell. I was still on the line with the police. I did my best to describe the scene to them. As much as I really didn't want to know what happened to that guy in the bathroom, I figured he could still need help. I announced to the operator that I was going back in. I held out hope that he was still alive, but feared otherwise. I guess I really went back into that hallway just out of morbid curiosity, more than anything else. I had to pull up my shirt and cover my face with it, to keep the smell from overpowering me. It didn't do much to help. The guy had yellowish powder all around his nose and mouth, as well as a little froth at the corners of his lips. His eyes were bloodshot and glazed over. I said to the operators that it looked like he'd overdosed on some drug. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to go outside for some fresh air. I was groggy and mortified and depressed. A man had just died next to me, for God's sake. At about 3 a.m. one night, I had a woman come in. Insanely skinny, blonde, thinning hair, and wearing what looked like pajamas. Nothing really out of the ordinary about her, so I only really glanced up as I buzzed her in, called out a quick greeting, and went back to cleaning. After about 2 or 3 minutes though, I look up and she's standing about 4 feet from the counter, just staring at me. Completely blank, unwavering kind of stare. It startled me a little, and I asked her if I could help her with anything. But she didn't reply and just continued to stare. She eventually began looking around the store, but she didn't take her eyes off me the entire time, even walking backwards at some point, so she wouldn't break eye contact. After she grabbed some things, she comes back to the counter, still staring, but also muttering something underneath her breath. It was really hard to hear what she was saying, but I managed to make out a brand of smokes after getting her to repeat it several times. I get them for her, scan all of her things, and she pays. Her eyes still locked onto me and showing no emotion at all. It was getting pretty unnerving at this point, and I was looking forward to getting her out of the door. As I'm handling over her change though, she suddenly smiles, which would normally ease the tension if she didn't also start to laugh. It was a really raspy laugh, kind of a cross between that croaky noise the Grudge makes and a typical witch's laugh. Kind of a cackle, I guess. I tried not to react too much and told her to have a good night and took a few steps back from the counter. We were both kind of frozen, her laughing and me having no idea what to do. She continued her cackling and staring for a few minutes and then left, walking backwards again so she could keep looking at me. I felt really freaked out at that point, but figured she was probably just drunk or high, or just had some stuff going on. I don't know. She was outside now and had wandered off, so I went back to cleaning and tried to shake the whole moment off. I was out in the store mopping, about an hour later when I heard a thud against the window. The whole front of our store is just glass panels, and the noise came from right beside me. I looked up, and this damn woman is back. Her hand is pushed up against the window, and she's laughing again. I could just hear it as I was close to the door. I must have really jumped at the sight of her, because she seemed to get a kick out of it, laughing even more and smacking her hand on the window repeatedly. I thought bugger the mopping and went behind the counter. I ended up staying in the back room, where all of our security screens are, and waiting for her to leave. It took around 45 minutes for her to clean off. The whole time, just banging on the window, and I assume still laughing at me. I'm really glad our doors are locked overnight, because I wouldn't have liked to have been on the same side of the counter as her. I'm not sure what her deal was, and I doubt she posed any real threat, but dang, it really freaked me out. I've seen her a few times since then, just wandering past on the footpath outside, but she has never come in or hung around again. For a bit of context, I work at a gas station in the backwoods of Tennessee, and that's where this happened. Last night when I clocked in at 8, the store was completely dead. I figured it was going to be a pretty easy night, because the road the station is on is not the main road. Actually, it used to be up until about a decade ago, when a new freeway was built. This led basically every business that was here to pack up and leave their old building abandoned. Thanks to this, there are a lot of abandoned buildings on this stretch of road that local druggies tend to claim as their own. Anyways, at around 11, I only had an hour left of my shift, and so I figured I should actually get some work done instead of just sitting around and doing nothing. I'm 18 years old, so I work the shift alone, which is nice, because it means I can do pretty much whatever I want. This is normally pretty great, because I can do whatever I want as long as I get my work done. I noticed we were out of barbecue chips, and so I'd need to go get them from our storage space, which is for some reason in the basement of the station. I've always hated going down there, just because it gives me the creeps. Why the owner decided to store everything down there is beyond my comprehension. I got about halfway down the steps before something fell on the other side of the room, and it sounded like footsteps were coming my way. I sprinted up the stairs and locked the door to the basement, panicking like a madman the entire time. When I got back upstairs, I went behind the counter to the store computer so I could check out the security cameras. I flicked over to the one that looks into the basement, and there was just this guy standing there, smiling up into the camera. He had a look of absolute insanity in his eyes, but he didn't look like the average junkie in the area. He was clean shaven and dressed in what looked to be jeans and a button-up of some kind. Honestly, if he walked into the store, I wouldn't have batted an eye. But because he was down there, and he was just looking into the camera smiling, shook me to the core. I called the store owner, and at first he was pretty mad I called him in the middle of the night, but once he heard how freaked out I was, his tone changed. He told me he'd be there in 15 minutes, and just to lock the main door to the store, and make sure the man didn't go anywhere. I asked if I should call the police, but for some reason he didn't want me to do that just yet. I locked the entrance to the gas station and went back to looking at the man. He was still just smiling up to me. About 3 or so minutes of him staring at me later, he walked out of the camera view. My boss showed up soon after, armed with a shotgun, and when I let him in, he immediately went to the basement. I went with him, just to feel safe and all, but we found nothing. My boss ultimately chalked this up to me being tired and hallucinating. But I know what I saw. This has me scared so bad I quit that job the next day. The store owner was not even questioning me why I was quitting. When I think about it now, why wouldn't he let me call the police when it happened? Deep down, I feel like the store owner has something to hide, and he was relieved that I did not find out what it was. In 2010, I was driving from New Orleans to Eugene. It was just me, 24-year-old female, and my 2-year-old pit bull in a 14-feet U-Haul truck with everything I owned crammed into the back. A fancy flip phone. I might print out MapQuest directions. I think the first smartphones actually came out around that time, but I didn't have one. Cell phone service was also much spottier, and there were long stretches through the desert where I had zero service for hundreds of miles. I was driving a lonely stretch of highway through central Texas when I realized I hadn't seen a town or exit for a very long time, and my giant U-Haul was really low on gas. Just when I'm starting to freak out and seriously run out of gas, I see a small town coming up. I pull into this town, and it is tiny. I was so worried about other things that I never did pay attention to the name of the town, but there were only about 6 streets in the whole place. I gas up, and I'm ready to head back on the road. Except, I cannot for the life of me find my way back to the highway. I circled the town about 4 times and started getting so frustrated because this is such a tiny town. How the freak can I not find my way out? I could literally see the highway, but can't get to it. I returned to the gas station to ask for directions. Now, when I got gas, I paid the pump and never went in. When I enter for directions, there's a skinny, nondescript guy who has black hair hanging down in front of his eyes that looks like it could use a good wash. He was not particularly creepy, but a little rude. He never really met my eyes. He was looking down at a magazine. He gave me directions that don't sound right at all. He's telling me to take the road that will get me to the highway in about 17 miles. For a brief moment, I am dumbfounded. Then, I point out that I didn't drive so far to get from the highway into the town. Why so far to get back to the highway? I can literally see it from the town. He was so casual, almost like I'm just an annoyance and can follow his directions, or not. Why should he care? He gives me some explanation about the road curving around that doesn't really make sense. He still doesn't look at me. Just whatever. He gave me my directions and waved his hand in the direction of the door. When I got into the parking lot, my whole body started trembling violently and my heart started racing, seemingly for no reason. I get into the truck, and as soon as I put my key into the ignition, I burst out in tears. I had the most terrible feeling that, no matter how nonchalant he acted, this man had bad intentions. I didn't know what to do, but I knew right then and there that there was no way I was going to follow his directions. Yet, this was the only store in this little town, and, short of knocking on doors, no thank you, there was no one else to ask for directions. I decided I didn't give a damn if this town seemed like something dropped out of the Twilight Zone. I was going to drive around until I find my way out, even if it took all damn night. Then, a big red beater of a pickup truck, as much rust as metal, pulls up and discourses the quintessential Texas man, huge, husky, in the flannel and work boots. Without even thinking about it, I jumped out of the truck and approached him quickly, yet warily. Looking into his eyes, I saw a kind human being, or at least I was hoping I did. I asked him if he could please give me directions to the highway. I told him I knew it was silly, but I just couldn't seem to find my way back. He looked concerned, as I was visibly upset. So he made me laugh and very cheerfully gave me directions for a hairpin curve turn-off right at the end of a small concrete tunnel I had passed several times. He said it often confused travelers because it's so hard to see. They need to put up a sign or something. With a sinking feeling in my stomach, I asked him how far in miles to get back to the highway. He laughed and gave me a funny look. "Miles, miss? I'd say it's a quarter mile at most. You can see the highway right from here." At this point, I couldn't help it. I had to know. "What happens if I drive?" And I gave him the directions the man in the store had given me. The man looked at me very intently and asked me how I knew about that route. It was pretty far out and usually only locals knew about it, so I told him. He was quiet for a few minutes, and then asked what the attendant looked like, and if I had a map of the state. Nope, just my map quest, which wasn't helpful in this situation. He goes to his truck and grabs a raggedy local map from his glove box. Spreading it out for me, he traces the route I describe. The way the man from the gas station had told me to go led away from town, far away from the interstate, and led to seemingly to the middle of nowhere. The man told me that the route did go about 17 miles, right before it dead-ended in the desert. I asked him what was out there, and he told me that it was nothing but just some junked cars and a few trailers and mobile homes, all owned by the same family. This family was known locally as troublemakers, meth heads, and alcoholics, and these were the things nice town people had been saying about them. And that store cleric was a part of this family and lived down the road. I'll never forget the look in the man's eyes as he told me this. He also told me that I was smart to listen to my instincts, and he told me to be careful traveling out there. I don't know if the man from the gas station wanted what was in the back of my U-Haul or what was in the driver's seat, but thankfully I didn't have to find out.